Hello, everyone, and welcome to Representation in Cinema. We talk about the representation of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color in movies. This podcast is hosted by Our Voices Project. Our goal is to dismantle destructive stereotypes of minority groups perpetuated in the media by producing films centered on the multifaceted experiences of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people by providing educational resources across marginalized groups brought on by the stories we share. Our Voices Project is also a committed community partner, providing opportunities to affirm racial and cultural identities, empowering students as agents of social change, and contributing to an individual's learning through cultivation of critical thinking. I'm Jackie McGriff, the director and producer for the Our Voices Project, and joining me is our incredible cinematographer, editor, and woman whose personal mission is to make sure you have fun things planned during your week, Deborah Alvarez. Welcome, Deb.
Jackie.
Yes, I added a new title. You're welcome. Anyway, and then joining us on the podcast today is Mia Alafaireet, postdoctoral fellow with the Frederick Douglass Institute for African American Studies at the University of Rochester. Welcome, Mia.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. Mia's research draws together African American literature, medical history, and environmental studies to investigate the complexities of Black health in America from the earliest 20th century to the present. She is currently working on a book called Transplanting Blackness, which reads Harlem Renaissance literature's botanical imagery as evidence of the movement's investment in environmental health. Also joining us on today's episode is Miriam Zinter. On July 5th, 2021, Miriam Zinter had an uncomfortable conversation with a neighbor whom she had known for 30 years. The neighbor asked why she had a Black Lives Matter sign in her front yard when Black people, quote, murder each other every day and Black lives don't matter to them, end quote. Miriam Zinter is a Black woman who is very light-skinned and appears to be white. This encounter was a catalyst which inspired her to write a personal piece for the Huffington Post entitled, I'm Black but look white. Here are the horrible things white people feel safe telling me. The piece went viral, garnering millions of views and generating discourse on the subject of race. What is race? What is Black? Who is Black? Who is white? With the Netflix movie Passing and the best-selling novel The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, these are questions which require uncomfortable conversations. These are questions Miriam Zinter had considered ever since she was 3 years old, and her family was the first Black family to live in Liverpool, New York in 1967. They faced vandalism of their home on a regular basis, and both subtle and overt racism from neighbors. For the past 35 years, Miriam has worked on a variety of social justice issues, including homelessness, affordable housing, and home ownership in the Black community. Miriam sits on several boards of directors, including the House of Mercy, Pathstone, and WXXI's Community Advisory Board, as well as WXXI's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Miriam is a member of Pillars, which is a group of African American and Hispanic professionals who work within the Rochester City School District to mentor students. Welcome, Miriam.
Should have unmuted myself. Thanks so much for having me today, Jackie. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so let's get started. Passing is a period drama released in 2021 starring Tessa Thompson, who you may know from Sylvie's Love, Sorry to Bother You, and both Thor Ragnarok and Love and Thunder, and Ruth Negga from Loving and the TV series Preacher. Set in New York City in the 1920s, a woman's world is turned upside down when she runs into a childhood friend who is passing as white. The film is based on the novel by Nella Larsen by the same name and is directed by Rebecca Hall, making her directorial debut. Excuse me. So if you haven't watched the film already, you can watch it on Netflix now and then come back to listen and or watch our podcast. From here on out, though, we'll be discussing the film in depth, so spoilers ahead. You have been warned. All right, so our first question, because there's a lot, so much to talk about within like our usual 45-minute thing. So I will start. Mia, if you'd like to start us off with what's one thing that impacted you the most with this film?
Sure. So I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone who's very attached to Passing, not just the film, but also the novel. And I think what's been really impactful for me about this story is the way that it takes a really raw and honest look at the experiences of multiracial people or folks who you might call racially ambiguous, in the sense that someone can look at them and maybe not be able to place them racially. And looking into experiences that are often discounted, particularly the experiences of belonging and alienation. And I think the story, even as it's translated to film, does a really good job of helping us think critically about, what's at stake when we have a rigid conception of the color line, and, how that can bar certain people from belonging in any group, and what the consequences of that are, not just for an individual, but for everyone.
Yeah, all great points. And Miriam, how about you?
My answer to the question about what impacted me the most about the film is probably less cerebral than Mia's. I grew up watching, I can't think of the, of course now I can't think of the name of the movie, but basically it's the kind of the tragic mulatto trope where, every single movie, there's the tragic mulatto. She rejects her culture. She tries to be somebody she's not. She creates the ultimate taboo of presenting a very false face to who she is, and she loses everything. She loses her family. She loses her self-respect. And in this case, both Claire and Renee, I think, epitomize the tragic mulatto, in that, Claire dies, and spoiler, and and
They've been warned, so it's good.
yeah,
It's okay.
and Renee, in my opinion, was in love with Claire, but had this very conflicted relationship on so many levels, and was responsible in a number of ways for Claire's ending. And so she continues on, but it's very tragic. A person that she was obsessed with, that she was in love with, is no longer there, a very large block of her life. So with me, I felt like here it is 2022, and we're still passing along this, tragic mulatto trope. And I think that we could have done a different story with it. It didn't end the way I thought it was going to.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to what you think should have been done, because that is a very good point. And then you're also coming from like a place that is not mine, because I had never thought about it that way from looking at the film. But yeah, I'll definitely want to come back to that later on.
Imitation of Life was the movie. My parents made me watch it. I remember as like a young kid, they were like, this is Imitation of Life. And look she rejected her family. She pretended she was white. And in the end, her mother dies, and she runs after her mother's coffin screaming, "Mama, Mama," but it's too late. So I remember watching that movie and thinking, this is something I will never do.
Wow. Okay. Add that to the list of movies that we need to watch, Deb. Okay. Wow. Deb, how about you? What was the most impactful for you in the film?
Yeah. Excuse me. So it was my first time watching it, not too long ago. So looking back, it was gut-wrenching to watch the scene where you see Irene and Claire and her husband, and talking, and he had just met Irene, and the comment that they made with Claire about, he's like, oh, she's getting a little more darker and darker throughout our marriage. I would, and then of course following the comment, and then her laughter, mechanical laughter, it was just heart-wrenching to watch, and really one of those moments, especially given the time period where it's like, you don't see many examples of women speaking up. And so for her, it was a very hard place. So it was just one of those scenes that I was like, well, this is, they could really start exploring that a little bit more, And I think from that, I think that set the tone to like where I knew that where Claire stood and I knew where Irene stood, basically,
Gotcha.
as far as
Yeah.
how they respected their race and how they viewed the race.
Gotcha. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, so the thing, I mean, there were several things, but the thing that stuck out to me the most, I think, was the way in which, so Renee's husband being a Black American who can't pass, and neither can their kids. Right, when you're looking at them, there's no way that they can pass and everything like that. And she's in like Renee's in this committee. I'm assuming it's for like it's part of the Negro League, and he's trying to have these conversations with these boys who are growing boys of current events that are happening. So there are current events happening, and I mean, given everything, all the context that's going on within the film, it still just strikes me that even though she is this person who is all for the advancement of of Black people, she still can't find like the opportunity, or doesn't even want to have the discussion with the rest of her family about lynchings that are taking place, things that are just happening in the world, wanting to move out, feeling like it's not safe for Black people. Her husband is trying to have these conversations with her, and yet she doesn't want to entertain that, or having her her sons come to that reality. And I'm not a mother, and I don't I'm outside of that. So just from like someone who's outside of that, not fully understanding like why she wouldn't want to have those conversations, that to me, I think, among lots of other things, because I could just make a list, but that my second time watching this film, out of like everything, was just the thing that I kept coming back to. So when Deb, when you were talking about, I think we've all touched on this a little bit. So when you're talking about like tragic, mulatto, like that stereotype and everything. Deb, when you're talking back to when they first meet, or when you see Claire for the first time, and you're finding out who her husband is and everything like that. So, at the first party. So we're talking about, at the first party. So yeah, never mind. When I'm going back to, I think I just referenced the first meeting, but I'm going to actually save that for a little bit later on in our discussion. I want to talk about that first party. So again, mentioning the Negro League, this is the party that Renee is hosting, or helping put together and everything like that. After pointing out to Hugh, so this is the man that she's talking to in this specific scene that I'm referencing. Hugh, when she's pointing out to Hugh that Claire is passing, Renee states, "We're all just passing for something or other, aren't we?" To what do you think she's referring? Miriam, I don't know why I'm having difficulty talking today, but Miriam, I'll point it to you first.
Oh, I think that Renee was gay, and she's passing. I mean, it's the 20s. I don't know. I don't know how much she knew about, being gay, or, if there was a community, particularly in the Black community, if there was any kind of recognition for LGBTQ at all. So she maybe had all of these feelings. And when she talked about, a feeling and an attraction that was slightly repugnant, I'm sure she kept pushing those feelings down. And then when they, would go through the time, and always that clock is ticking, and they're showing the changing of the seasons, and how she becomes more and more depressed. I just think she was passing for being straight and being content and being in a happy relationship. And none of that was true.
Oh, absolutely. I think I first got the hint of something just like being, first with her first meeting with Claire, but then also just her interactions with the husband. I was just like, y'all, couldn't, y'all seem like the furthest apart. And I was like, I don't know if that's just your relationship, but something is definitely off. So I definitely agree with that. Mia, how about you?
I definitely agree with Miriam too. That was the first thing that I thought of. I also think that Irene may be passing for content in a broader sense. So she projects this image of being, the proper race woman who's invested in these causes. Her husband is a doctor. As a couple, they're uplifting the race. But at the same time, she seems to me to be unhappy in that life and is really just trying to project, at least on a certain level, trying to project a certain image that her heart may not be totally invested in. And that might tie back to what you were saying, Jackie, about her not wanting to actually go into detail about these social issues and the racial violence at hand. So I think she's passing as happy in the life that she's created in this mold that she thinks she should fit.
Yeah,
I also wonder if she could be talking a bit about Hugh in this moment, in the sense that he may be passing for progressive in being at this party, but he may be sort of exoticizing some of the people, just as Irene was talking about.
Yes, we'll get to that quote later. Can't wait to talk about it. Awesome. Thank you, Mia. And Deb, to you. To what do you think she's referring?
No, it was super interesting. I loved the scene in its entirety. I was having a mix of emotions throughout that whole thing, because being a bi woman, I was wondering too, I'm like, wait a minute, something's like not right. She seems like she's really connected with, like, she has a connection with Claire more so than her husband. So it was like, okay. And in a sense, at first I'm like, well, maybe she is able to relate to Claire because she's another woman who can pass. And so there's that, that like connection there. And she also kind of feels I don't know, it seemed like she feels kind of sorry for Claire, because she knows that even though Claire has like picked a side, she still feels trapped. Like, it seems that Claire is still trapped, obviously, because she's in a marriage where she's lying. So, yeah, it was just very interesting just watching that whole thing play out. And it made me think, okay, so Jackie, this literally, there's a part, how Irene reaches out her hand to Claire, and they share that moment. I thought about the scene in Nicholas Nickleby.
Oh God, no, there will be no talk of Nicholas Nickleby here. Okay, all of the slander. We don't have time. That will be a whole other podcast, people. For those of you listening and or watching, it's not a love-hate relationship. Love-hate relationship with Nicholas Nickleby, because I do love period dramas, as we're talking about today. But no, I will not. That's for another discussion, another time, probably off the podcast. Because
I can mention, like, at least the joke, the fact that, right? Is that okay?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, so with Nicholas Nickleby, I didn't think that the relationship between the main guy and this other side character, Jackie thought that they were gay, but
okay. Just let me just add the context, and then it'll be it. That'll be it, because I could just go on all day about this. So for Miriam and Mia, for your context, as well as the rest of our listeners. So I'm always looking for period dramas, of course, to watch. I had mentioned Nicholas Nickleby, which was a film that I think you grew up on just loving, and so I borrowed the DVD, I watched it, and there are several moments within the movie where the two main characters, okay, Nicholas Nickleby and his friend, right, share these like loving, kind of like yearning exchanges at one another. And I'm like, wait, do they love each other? And like, he has a woman like love interest, but I kept saying, no, Deb, no, I don't think that's the case, even though that's what the movie was pushing for, at the end. He gets the whatever. But I'm just like, no, absolutely not. Plus there are several gay actors in the film. So I was like, is that what are they trying to hint at that? Like, what is going on? So no, I do understand. Yes, that hand exchange that they have, that was also another sign to me. I was like, No, see, she's
Yeah.
not only obsessed with her, she loves her, or she at least like is attracted to her.
The
Like,
sexual tension was so
yes,
thick you could cut it with a
yes,
knife.
there was so much
And
that wasn't being said.
Yeah.
Like,
after she met Claire for the first time, and then she like attacked her husband, and he was like, "Who's this?" And you could tell she was thinking of Claire when she was all over her husband. And I said, "Damn."
Miriam, I detect no lies whatsoever.
Nope.
That is about it. Okay, so that I'm going to segue into a question that I had for all of you, because I just think, again, just going back to that first party, it's like it just catapults everything else, right? It kicks off like everything else. So again at the party, so Irene and Hugh are talking about a specific, like pick out a specific gentleman like in the party or whatever, and they're talking about whether or not he's attractive. Irene points out that, and said, this is in quotes, it's just plain exoticism, an interest in what's different, a kind of emotional excitement, something that you feel in the presence of something strange and even perhaps a bit repugnant to you. Does that not sound like exactly what we're talking about? So if you're only hearing the scene, or if you're not seeing what's happening, so if you're only hearing the scene, it's clearly about, and then they make this reference earlier in the conversation about white people attending Black parties, and like how there's that, like, again, that tinge of like excitement being about something that is like different, but again, a bit repugnant to you. So however, so that's only if you're hearing it. But if you're also you're hearing what she's saying and you're seeing like where the camera's focused on, it alternates back and forth between Irene speaking and Claire dancing. So do you think it's obsession, or, and I think we've already clarified this, but just to reiterate, do you think that Irene is obsessed with her, or do you think it's more than that? What are your thoughts? Miriam, I'll go back to you and then I'll shoot it over to Mia.
Well, I think instead of using the word repugnant, if you switch it with forbidden, it becomes very clear. But also in that same scene, after Claire's done dancing, she comes over and she stands next to Irene, and the camera pans and it's Irene's viewpoint, and it starts at Claire's head and then it just drifts all the way down to Claire's, am I allowed to say ass?
Yeah, sure.
That's where it drifts down to. And then she kind of leans over and she holds Claire's hand. And I was just like, obviously when she was watching Claire's dancing and she was talking about it, she was not talking about the handsome gentleman Claire was talking about. She was talking about her feelings for Claire and the lust that she was feeling. And I think that was kind of in the beginning of the relationship. And then as it progressed through the seasons, it developed actually, I think, deeper into love.
Yeah, absolutely. I would 100% back that up. Mia, how do you feel?
I definitely agree. It seems to be a moment of projection, not to say that what Reenie's observing isn't clear and true on its own, but she seems to be projecting her own feelings in that moment and discussing her own feelings. In terms of whether she's just obsessed with Claire or if it's more than that, I think we've established there's a romantic attraction there, but I also feel like there's some more layers to how Irene feels about Claire and why she's obsessed, and part of it seems to be jealousy and concern that Claire might replace her in the family. Like there's an earlier scene when Claire first comes to the Redfields' house, and well, it might be her second visit, but Irene comes down the stairs and she sees the reflection in a mirror of Brian and Claire, and it at first looks like they're really close. And then she comes around the corner and she sees actually they're standing further apart. So she seems to have some paranoia about Claire sort of stepping into her shoes as well.
Now, Mia, as someone who you had mentioned earlier that you had read the book. Is this more clear in the book, like about like her, when you're talking about, her fearing, or just like, having this fear of like being replaced by Claire. Is that more prominent in the book, or is it leaning towards someplace else? Like having those, again, like drawing out those romantic feelings, or at least hiding those romantic feelings that she has for Claire.
I think it's intentionally ambiguous in the book. I think we're supposed to wonder what Reedy is feeling about Claire. I do think that there are clear moments where you just think, oh yeah, this is more than that. In terms of whether the perceived dynamic between Brian and Claire is clearer, I think that is clearer in the text. There is a moment where Irene says to herself, she would not be uprooted, not even by Claire Kendry, which sort of speaks to this idea that she's afraid Claire is going to disrupt her life.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. I'm glad they draw a line somewhere in the film, because whenever something is ambiguous, I'm like, no, just tell me. Deb, your thoughts?
Yeah, so initially going in, I was already aware that Irene wasn't really in love with her husband and was more obsessed with Claire. And so watching it, at first, I thought that she was talking about her husband, because I was like, well, he could be seen as the guy dancing with Claire as well in that regard. But again, it was like, wait, no, like, it makes way more sense the more she was like, later on I was like, yeah, it was about Claire. So there was like this like mix of feelings and like realization, like, wait, is it the husband, is it Claire, like what's actually going on? And it just, as it unfolded, it became more clear to me.
Right. Like Mia had said before, layers. Like there are so many different layers that you can put on that, for sure. Thanks, Deb. Okay, so moving right along, who and or what do you think is responsible for Claire's death? Miriam, I'll have you start.
Layers again. So, when Renee bumped into Claire's husband on the street and she is with her friend, and clearly she knows he's figured it out. She like makes one call, but then she sees Claire and she doesn't say, hey, the jig is up, warning you, your husband knows, and you know what he said about he hates Black people. So she doesn't say anything. They walk up there. Now, granted, she opens the window so she could smoke. And then I replayed it over and over. Did she shove her out that window? Was she trying to protect her? Was it a combination of both? It was ambiguous. I mean, was it Claire's lies caught up with her? Was it that she had stated that if John ever found out, Claire was going to just move in with Renee, and Renee couldn't have that because her husband and kids like Claire better? Or Renee couldn't have that because she wouldn't be able to hide her true feelings for Claire? Or Renee couldn't have that because having the person she loves so close under the roof of her house would be more than she could bear? So many layers.
Mia, how about you?
I guess I think one way of looking at it is that there's a collective responsibility for what happens to Claire. What I think is really interesting about that scene symbolically is that Claire falls out the window and then everybody sort of falls with her. So suddenly they're all racing down the stairs. They're all going down to the pavement with her. And to me, that sort of implies that this is a collective fate and a collective responsibility for what happens to Claire. Despite all of the sort of foreshadowing that Irene might do something to Claire, like the flower pot falling out the window, but I guess I read it as a collective responsibility.
No, that's a great point. I actually thought of that to my second rewatch, was like that. Well, that scene where the flower pot, or she drops the flower pot and everything. I started to think back to like when the first time I watched it and seen saw that scene. I'm just gonna let it go. But and I'm like trying to think of like the parallels between the two and everything, and like thinking, is it talking about her being responsible or at least partially responsible? You know, like she dropped the flower pot, you know, and then I don't know, is she again? I go back and forth between is she protecting her, is she like kind of like helping her like out of the, you know, out of the window. I don't know. Deb, what are your thoughts?
Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking of how she initially tried to turn away Claire by using the excuse of her safety, the issue of her safety being a thing with her and her family by coming to see is Reenie her nickname?
Yeah, Rainy. That's what
Okay.
Claire calls.
I
That's
was
what
like,
Claire
wait,
calls her. Yes.
okay. I was like, yeah, I forgot. Yeah, no, she was having that, but it didn't seem like that was really her reason of not wanting to talk to Claire. And it literally, it makes me think, I'm like wondering, is it because of the conversation with her and her husband, and she agrees with her husband that she shouldn't give an inch to Claire?
Mm-hmm.
Or should it be like something, you know, where she's noticing she's having these feelings, and she thinks that having Claire in her life is going to make it more complicated or make her, you know, like make it harder for her. And so she's thinking of herself. Now, in
Mm-hmm.
regards to her, whether or not she killed Claire, it did look ambiguous the way it was filmed, but I personally think that she felt torn. She wanted to help Claire, but then she also was jealous of her, and like obviously had the obsession and loved her, and didn't, but also was like, you know, it's like she didn't like she was paranoid. Like you were saying, me of how she was around her Irene's husband. So it's like yeah, I think it was just like a mix. Like she wanted to protect Claire in that moment, but it was like accident that she got pushed. I think it was an honest accident, to be honest. Even though it was filmed ambiguous, I think it was an accident. And she just was too stunned to like understand fully what was going on afterwards. Because you know how the camera hangs on her, and she's
Yes.
just like,
Yeah.
what did I do? You know, like what happened?
Yes,
So.
with stellar acting, by the way, by Tessa Thompson, who did not get an Oscar nom. I'm not bitter about it at all. But you know, such is life. I seriously, I will. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I think she's also bisexual in real life too, actually.
Yeah, Tessa Thompson. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so I want to go back. We do have a little bit of time here to get into something, Miriam, that you had mentioned earlier about growing up and seeing all these movies that sort of depict, again, they do depict this tragic mulatto. I want to hear your response to what you think Passing should have done, instead, to kind of turn that.
I don't know if it should have done something, but when they were showing Claire and Reenie together, I was actually really worried about this plot that I thought I saw coming along the way. So they keep showing Claire and Reenie getting closer and closer and having this bond, but and then they keep having the husband talk about lynching and this lynching of the man in Arkansas because he was with a white woman. And then Reenie keeps telling her husband, why don't you go to this event with Claire? Putting him, and what I thought, unless they were sticking in Harlem, a potentially deadly situation of a Black man with a white woman, particularly if they ran into John, Claire's husband. And I kept thinking, I really hope that this isn't a plot of where Claire and Reenie get together and they think, let's set Brian up and, you know, arrange for John to bump into Claire with Brian, and she's like, oh, this Black man's bothering me and he frightens me. And then Brian gets lynched, and then Claire leaves John, and then Reenie and Claire run off together. And that's what I thought was going to happen. So, and I thought, oh my gosh, these bitches. but that's not what happened.
Thank
But,
God.
but I was like, why do they keep bringing up the lynching? It's like bringing out the gun in scene 1 and then never using it. I thought that for sure it was going to be, Claire was going to end up with Brian being cozy, and then due to fear or a plot or something, throw him under the bus, just like she threw her culture, her race under the bus for a long time.
Wow.
And so I was surprised when that didn't happen.
That is, oh my gosh, there's so many interesting points that you and Mia are making, and I'm just like, dang, I need to watch again. As you know, as one should. I mean, it's, again, we're talking about multiple layers. I do think that it's interesting that you bring up that you bring that point up too, because I had a little bit of that thinking though for the end scene, because I'm like, here's this woman who is passing as white, right? So if the cops take a look at this white woman who fell from a window, right, and all of these Black people are surrounding, I'm thinking, oh dear God, like what's going to happen to those people? So yeah, so but to also bring that back to, again, like this idea of setting Brian up, right, with like having Claire go with him to the party, and then it ultimately being something to just throw him under the bus. Whew, I don't know how I don't know if I would have been able to finish the movie, but no, that is a good point. I'm glad it didn't go that way, but I think that's also too I think another thing that I like about this movie, and is that it goes into these directions that I didn't think that they were going to go into. And so, yeah, no, that is really, it's really interesting and thought-provoking, because I like, after we talk, I'm going to be thinking about that for at least another hour or so, because yeah, that is a great point that you bring up. Let's see. Okay, so final thoughts about the film. Anything that you want to mention, that we haven't already talked about? Mia, I will start with you.
If we had more time, I would definitely want to talk more about the scene where Renee meets Claire's husband and finds out the awful racist nickname that he has for her. Because what I thought was so, I mean, when he said that was distressing. But what I found even more unsettling was the way that Irene laughed in that moment, because she's so controlled otherwise, and she has this moment of sort of kind of losing it and putting Claire in danger by laughing too much and laughing too hard at that joke. So that's a scene I'm still thinking about, and I don't quite know what to make of it. But yeah, so if we had more time, that's what I would talk about.
I thought it was because Renee was terrified, because she at that point realized she was in the lion's den with a crazy racist white man. Yeah. And a person she hadn't seen for a long time that she really couldn't trust. And if she was thinking, if he takes a good look at me, what will happen to me? But yeah, that maniacal laughter was terrifying.
Yeah. That's why it impacted me so much, because I was like, oh my gosh, like it's a very heavy scene. Yeah. What were you gonna say, Jackie?
Oh, no, I was just gonna say again, like amazing acting by Tessa Thompson and also Ruth Negga, who again did not get nominations. I'm not bitter about it. Like I keep saying, I'm clearly bitter about it, and I will be for the foreseeable future. Deb, your final thoughts?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting looking at this film, and really, because I'm biracial as well, but of course I cannot relate in this regard to this example, but definitely a lot of the inner turmoil seen on film, I think, was pretty accurate and well done, especially, with that scene with her laughing too long. It reminded me of times when I would laugh uncomfortably in uncomfortable situations, basically. And so it definitely, I think this movie definitely was well done, but could be made better. There could be so much more that you could touch on this type of topic. So I agree with, I think you were saying that, Miriam, earlier, that it could be, there could be another really great spin on that. So yeah.
Let's see, as far as, and thank you very much for sharing, Deb. And for all of you for sharing. With my final thoughts, I will say this. I just want to make a quick mention of the brilliant cinematography. I think making the choice to make it black and white, right? To kind of have that, I don't know if ambiguity is the right word, but whether or not you think, like, just looking at them, you could think that they could pass, like, in real life and everything, to just make that not the argument. The argument here is, like, it's between these two women. It's both of them using, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, Miriam, because I don't know if I'm using that correctly. But they're both in some way using, the fact that they can pass as white, for different reasons. So I want to thank you again, Miriam, for joining us on our talk about passing. Like I said, we should probably, I could
That's
talk
a great
about this.
film. So good. Yeah.
Yes, so good. We'll have to definitely talk, if you want to, more about it, of course, offline. Mia, thank you again for joining us as well. Really appreciated your thoughts and your feelings about the movie.
Yeah.
Having me.
Absolutely. To our viewers and listeners, thank you so much for your support of Our Voices Project and our Representation in Cinema podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and at www.ourvoicesproject.com for more information about what we do. You can sign up for our newsletter there to be the first to get notifications about new podcast episodes and projects that we're working on. We're also filmmakers. Woo! We're going to be talking about the movie Moonlight in July, so be on the lookout for the discussion coming your way soon. You can listen to this podcast anywhere that you listen to your favorite podcasts, as well as view it on our YouTube channel. This has been Jackie McGriff and Deborah Alvarez of Our Voices Project. Thank you again for listening and for watching.